just waiting to see that this gets on. Okay, looks like we are live. Okay, just let me check the microphone thing. So it started doing something strange here before. Built in. Great. Great. Okay. Hello. So as I mentioned in a post I gave yesterday, wanted to start doing a live stream thing here each week on Facebook. I wanted to give a little more of a context in a way that you can feel here, and also give anybody who shows up in here an opportunity to ask questions or explore. Honestly, don't know if anybody is, but I want to make this easy for people to engage with if they want to. That feels fulfilling to me, and it also it sort of stirs the process and makes the process much more fluid. Okay, so in terms of what this series is about, this is not exactly pre-planned in terms of these are the things I'm going to talk about in this order, but there's a large arc of context that I think is very powerful. It's very important for, it's important, depends on where you are, what you're trying to do, but very relevant for where we are as a human species. And I find it fun. It's fascinating, it's beautiful. So a lot of the challenge that we seem to be running into today is that we're, like we as a human race, a lot of it looks like it's built on this basis of a kind of confusion, a kind of confusion that's been okay up to this point. So it's been okay to live by principles, live by ideas, right? That was a lot of the arc of the Western world. It's been a lot of the ideological fights that we find today, like the business of like free speech. What is the term? Like Elon Musk described himself as it's cashing in my head as free speech fundamentalist, but there's something like that. It's like free speech fundamentalism versus the kinds of concerns that show up with things like, well, you know, if you just let anybody speak, you're going to have people who have really unsavory attitudes like neo-Nazis, and the term's been beaten to smithereens, but racists being able to push their ideas forward. These conversations have a lot of value in a particular context. Hello, Anisha, good morning. So these conversations have some relevance, but there's a larger conversation that we're sort of missing. Okay? And in some ways, I want to say that it's a kind of intentional. Right? So it's very easy to mishear what I mean when I say intentional. I'll be getting into this, but to be clear, I don't mean conspiracies. Okay, I'm not discounting conspiracies either, but there's something larger going on. There's something tremendously larger. So what the thing that I'm pointing at is the way in which we are all heirs to the traditions and paths and practices of our ancestors. There's an easy way to make this about, when I say ancestor, this often brings in things about almost indigenous wisdom and how do you tune into like shamanic practices or the wisdom of our elders or that kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about, although that can be relevant. What I mean is, one snarky way of putting it is, most people don't think anything new. Most people don't believe anything new. They might believe new things for them, but when people go through a kind of, oh, this makes sense, this resonates for me, the reason for that resonance in most cases is not because they're just recognizing truth. It's because they think they're recognizing truth. It's a big, big difference. the resonance, like what is it resonating with? Like the term resonance is very telling. It's very telling in this context. So so when I was a teenager, I was super into things having to do with neo-paganism and Wicca. Because like to a large extent, I thought it was because, oh, I want magic. If they have magic, if they can actually cast spells and do magic, I want that. Right? And so there was something about magic and the realm of fantasy and being a wizard that was always very resonant for me. But I also felt very dissonant with a lot of the tones of worship, like the sense of we're going to honor the goddess. It's the same tone that I actually had a problem with Christianity at that age. But I was raised in kind of an atheist context. So atheism, when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, was very specifically and targeted at Christianity, a Christian belief. So the thing about this resonance and dissonance is that when the term is coming from, like, so when you pluck a bell and it has a certain resonant tone, it rings, it vibrates at a certain frequency. And if you ring a bell that has exactly the right frequency, a guitar that is nearby will have the string that corresponds to that note also vibrate. That's what resonance is. Like, oh, this rings true. It's of the same frequency. Resonance is not inherently a sign of truth unless you're toning into the note of truth. Okay. So by default, what happens instead is people are carrying the past in their bodies. And I can clarify what I mean by that over time, but this is becoming popular in the idea of trauma, in that people carry trauma in their bodies. So that, and that you need to transform that trauma in order to not get stuck in the vision of the past. So whatever is in your body, like this structure of trauma, for instance, is what will resonate with what you encounter in the world. So if you don't have a way of distinguishing clearly between resonance and truth, you'll find yourself gravitating to reenacting the things that are sort of in you. This is something of the deeper mechanism behind this expression of those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. It's not some law. It's not some abstract law. It's a very mechanical principle that once you see it, it becomes very, very easy to feel and easy to watch. A lot of what's going on today could be summed up as people don't recognize that they are not consciously in control of the forces that are actually governing the flow of history. Those forces are so much larger than individuals, so much larger. There's some, it's, my mind is filled with lots of these examples of, okay, here's the structure of wokeism. Here's the bit with like atheism and the background of atheism. Here's the background with science. Here's the background with nationalism. Right? Each of these has a thread to it, has a feel, it has a flow to it. And these flows move lots of people, lots and lots of people. That, yeah, I find I actually want to change tack here. Because there's I think a tidier way of highlighting this. This will be an apocryphal story. Okay, so don't believe this too much. But one of the suggestions I've heard is that autism might actually be a modern manifestation of something that was standard for Neanderthals. The reason autism exists in the world today is basically because Neanderthal DNA is present there, and Neanderthals were just like that. So it is quite possible in this story. And don't take this too seriously. I'm trying to gesture at something like I'm trying to point at an intuition here. There's a question of why did we, or something like how did we wipe out the Neanderthals? They were bigger, they were stronger. They were better at hunting at night, right? Some people have suggested that a lot of the legends of vampires may have actually come from a sort of blood feud between humans and Neanderthals. I don't quite believe that, but it sort of gives a picture of like these are effective nighttime hunters that if we pissed off, we would have big and strong, and you'd just be dead, right? But it's also worth tracking what is the stuff that autism actually has a hard time tracking. Okay. There's something about a kind of social flow that autists have to kind of learn very explicitly, learn very analytically. So it seems quite possible that the main force that humans, Homo sapiens, were able to harness in order to deal with and conquer and beat out, like, genocidally destroy the Neanderthals, was our capacity to, in some sense, build gods that could move through us. This capacity for a group, for you to just kind of almost lose yourself in a group and just like this force that could be so much stronger, like taking the concept of a group, of a tribe, and making it something more, making it something that rather than just being a group of people who protect each other, like a multicellular blob, it becomes more like a multicellular organism. Okay. Now, I don't know if that's true about how we killed the Neanderthals. In an important way, I don't care. But this is gesturing towards something very powerful and important about the arc of history that we're in. Right now, we are in a stage of history that is roughly comparable to the emergence of multicellular organisms, where we are the cells. There have been several major shock points in the history of the universe. One of them was the formation of life. There's this huge explosion that happened at the formation of life, where like the planets and the forces like gravity and the colliding of large bodies, like these are major forces that overwhelm the capacity of life, but they're slow. The cycle at which life can regenerate and can mutate and can evolve is so much faster than the physical environment typically changes, that we find that life ends up dominating every surface it touches. Like the Earth got covered in life because it could, because it's faster than geological time. And with all of these tectonic plates moving and so on, that's fine. Life evolves so much faster than that. But one of the other major jumps is the creation of sexual reproduction. Right? The shift from I'm just going to create copies of myself, the way bacteria split, to let's take two different cells and merge them in some fashion that splices their DNA together into a coherent organism. Like that was a major trick. But once that happened, the rate of new strategies to evolve accelerated tremendously. So that was another major jump. Right? So everything that developed sexual reproduction ended up dominating way, way over the single cell production. This is why humans are the ones with intelligence, the ones with the capacity to organize and orient to the world in such a vast way, that we are the dominant living creature on Earth, and we reproduce sexually. Like these two are not a coincidence at all. All of the non-sexually reproducing creatures, like almost all of them are single cellular organisms like bacteria. So there's more of them, but they act more like forces. They aren't things we have to negotiate with, for the most part. So so there are these shock points in the evolution of humanity, or in the evolution of existence, really. And where we are as humans, we are sort of at the tail end of one of these shock points, the cultivation of memes. The concept of an internet meme has become these little pictures, right, with a little caption on it, like the butterfly. Is this philosophy or whatever, right? So these kinds of images, the word meme got co-opted, which is an example of memetics. It's a vivid example of memetics. But this concept of a meme actually started out from Richard Dawkins. Well, I mean, the concept is older than him, but he coined the term meme. I think it was in the 80s, I think it was. I believe the book where he specified this was The Selfish Gene. It might have been somewhere else, but I'm pretty sure it was The Selfish Gene. And what he was trying to posit there is the same way that genes form the kind of basic code of life, like a DNA's relevance. Hi, Sarah. The way that genes code the basic stuff of life. Like DNA's relevance is that it is the code that genes are written on. Right? That's the human genome. This is, when we talk about genetic, like this is an information structure. That the information structure of life can be encoded in, oh, this is what's happening at DNA. This is why DNA is relevant. The concept of the selfish gene is that life evolves because genes that are better at preserving themselves compared to other genes propagate better than those other genes. It's sort of self-evident once you see that. Once you see it, you can see this is actually enough to define the structure of biological evolution. Right? That was Dawkins' main point there. But he was suggesting that in an analogy to what was going on with biology, there seems to be something similar going on with belief. He did this primarily to attack religion because that's a thing you do if you are an heir of the Enlightenment. If you're an heir particularly to the immune system that the European Enlightenment brought forward, which is if it smacks of a higher way of being, then that is dangerous and we need to tear it down. That's the basic instinct, because anything that speaks of a higher world secretly, it might corrupt your soul. Because they don't, yeah, there's so much to say here. There's so much, but in any case, he was taking in this question of religion and asking, well, how does religion propagate in absence of any value? Right? So, so he's taking a very strong particular stance, but I think that there's an important way where he has a point. A lot of modern religions don't carry spiritual juice. What they carry instead is a sense of belonging and a framework that you can use that lets you feel like the world makes sense. And that as long as you live in that framework, if you live in that matrix, then you can navigate, you can function. That's the great insight, or not insight, that's the great mechanism. Most of them, from what I can tell, and most by some standard, I mean something like the most common that I encounter that people seem to talk about. Certainly in, well, I don't want to pick on any particular denominations, but most religions have lost their sacred juice. In Gnosticism, I would say they have fallen to the demiurge, fallen to Yaldabaoth. So this is stuff I want to get into in this series. So I'm sort of giving a fast overview of a lot of things here. But there is something of like the type of deep soulful transformation that like if you imagine something like the origin of Christianity, if you just sort of take some of these stories at face value, just bear with me, take the stories at face value and you just go, okay, Christ rose from the dead and did all of this stuff. Okay, there'd be something like, wow, that's amazing magic, and let me listen to this guy. well, where is the amazing magic? And a lot of Catholicism tells all these stories of miracles, but the modern church can't produce miracles on that scale. Why? Right? And no one's bothered by this. And so that's the kind of thing that Dawkins is pointing at. And I want to emphasize, in saying all of this, I don't mean to bash any of this, any of these religions, any of this stuff. I'm just trying to describe something as it is. Dawkins is pointing out something that there's a grain of truth. Everything that resonates and everything that has the power to deceive does so because it has a grain of truth in it. The reason it deceives is because it uses the grain of truth to distract you from the truth. There's mine zips over to, oh, this is the Samael, the clip of Hod, but we'll play with that later. So the question then is, well, given that religion doesn't have the kind of miraculous powers that it claims one can get by believing in it, it can't demonstrate any of this. It's kind of boring. It sort of numbs people out to things that definitely work. Like some forms of religion can even turn the religious against things that demonstrably can work, like science, like electricity and the understanding of how electricity works, etc. So how does religion propagate in the absence of demonstrable power? Okay. So Dawkins was proposing that in analogy to how genes propagate not because they're supposed to or because they're effective, but because they are better at spreading than other genes, he was proposing that the core seed of a belief system that propagates is a mean, and that what defines a mean's propagation, whether it propagates or not, is whether it is better at propagating than other means it would compete with. That was the origin of mean. Now, Dawkins sort of spawned inspiration to go into a field of memetics, to create a sort of scientific field of memetics, which melted down due to memetic illiteracy. So the history of this in fast forward is in the 21st century, a bunch of people tried to get together, even produced some journal articles on memetics, trying to forward the field. But they ran into two major problems. One was that they couldn't agree on what a meme is, because they couldn't find, well, what is the equivalent of DNA in ideas? What's the thing that is replicating? And we can't find one specific thing that's replicating. Is it the words? No, it's not the words. I mean, because like here are examples of like Maxwell's equations can be, it technically counts as a meme in a sense, or maybe a cluster of memes. It's unclear because we don't know what a meme is. Okay, but you can write them differently and they're still Maxwell's equations. So it's not about what are the words, what are the specific things. It's somehow the idea itself. But now are we positing some sort of higher reality where ideas exist independent of the physical world, and somehow we're tuning into these ideas? Well, where's this higher reality? That doesn't, like, how do you know that you're tuning? Like, that doesn't make any sense. This is in defiance of what we know from science. Science doesn't know. Science doesn't know that at all. It was an assumption. It was very, very much an assumption. It was an assumption meant to split science from wisdom practices, from religion and from hermetic sorcery and alchemy, so that the cultivation of self and the examination of the physical world could be viewed as two separate disciplines, and so that you could ignore the internal work in order to only focus on manipulating the physical world. So one way to do that is to say there is no development that is interesting to us, and then later to say there's no development at all. What does it mean to develop? This is part of why psychological health today is mostly in terms of not having psychological disorders. This is part of what we have received from the European Enlightenment. Same thing with the physical body and physical health as well. Health used to be a matter of vibrancy, and a dimension of vibrancy was an indication of needing to pay attention to something. And you would talk to herbalists or shamans. Like, there are lots of people you could turn to. And today, the main theme in medicine follows the same theme. Health is the absence of illnesses. So let's identify an illness and see if we can get rid of the symptoms of it. Because if you have no symptoms, then you're healthy. And there's a little nuance to that. I'm being a little unfair. But importantly, not by much. Not by much. There is no transcendent paradigm of health right now. So I'm touching on this wide range of things because in part, I want you to feel the sense of vastness of what we're talking about. But if it boil this down into something very simple, there are many ways to view this simple thing. There's a core thrust, which is that there is a coherent thing that it means for something to be a me. We have to shift our vision a little bit, but you can actually see them. It's not difficult to see something like so for instance, anti-racism. Anti-racism wasn't a thing 5 years ago. Now it very much is a thing. It has a name, it has a kind of philosophy to it. A lot of people follow it. Excuse me. A lot of people engage with others through that lens. It obviously is something people wear and it moves through people. But more importantly, it moves through people as its vessel. If one person switches into being an anti-racist or out of being an anti-racist, this doesn't actually meaningfully affect the overall movement. The movement is bigger than individuals. And if somebody posts something out in public, saying, here is a problem with anti-racism, there is a swarm that attacks, and the thing evolves ways of attacking. So what you're looking at is something a lot more like an ant colony and a lot less like an idea that a bunch of independent thinking individuals believe. So this is an example of what I mean when I'm talking about a meme, or in this case, maybe an egregore is a better term for this, a living entity that has no body, but nonetheless has the behavior of an intelligent organism that lives through people. Now, when I say this, I see, Anisha, you have a comment there. I'll get to you in a moment. And when I say this, it's important to not assume that I'm talking about some higher reality where these egregores exist independent of the physical world, because this will activate a lot of the Enlightenment immune system reactions and the counter immune system reactions of, oh yes, that resonates with me because of these spiritual beliefs. Both of these are a kind of nuts. They're an important kind of nuts. What I'm saying is independent of that. I'm pointing out there's a thing you can see. When you look for yourself, you can see it for yourself. And then how I'm saying it and what metaphors I'm using doesn't matter anymore. Okay. Anisha mentions, despite knowing I was saying it wrong, up until last year, I would always say me, coincidence, maybe lol, maybe not. And when I would call them memes, I always thought it was a strange thing to name a thing. I'm not sure which thing you're calling a meme. Oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, I see. I imagine you're typing on your phone or something and it just put a space in there. Until last year, I was always saying meme. I assume. This is just adding a space. Cool. Yeah, so there's something, so this touches on part of the reason why I want to offer this series. Like I feel like I'm doing something like a bit of public service. I'm also working on opening myself up. It's very easy for me to go into my head about this stuff. I'm doing so a lot in this particular presentation, but there's a service to offer to those who want to hear it in this series. Most of what we are is memetic. I mean this in the sense of what we identify with, where we put our attention, what we focus on, what we call ourselves. Who is Michael? Okay, you would say memes. Oh, that's cool. Cool. Yeah, that is a fun coincidence. Okay, so the point I'm making is a little aside from the one I think you're saying here, but not entirely. So who I am, when I think of I am Michael, I trained in martial arts. I got my PhD in math education. I ran a company. I know all of this stuff. Like I have all these things about history that I want to share. These are memes. They're specifically memetic structures that are shaped to this biological organism. Okay. So if I operate under a kind of assumption that I know the truth, and that's what I'm speaking to. I know that Christ is the Lord. So for instance, this is not a meme I really carry, but if I did, this is a truth. Or another one could be, well, we know these things from physics. We know these experiments about like the structure of quantum mechanics has this extremely high reliability, and the belief in these memes doesn't make them any less memetic. The reason they're there is not because they're true, it's because they're in the body. So if your core memetic structure, if the organizing memetic structure in your system is not self-aware, which means it's not conscious of the way that memes work, this means that the belief systems that you use are invisible to you. Which means that if they are extensions of a larger force, the way that anti-racism is a larger force than any individual. And I think a lot of people would argue racism is another version of this kind of force. And I think that's like, what racism means is very sloppy, and this is part of the issue. The way that these egregores fight makes a lot of language very difficult, right? But I think we can navigate. But if you take like the idea of people of a different race, or of a certain, like people of a certain skin tone, so just make it very grounded. People whose skin tone is too dark are worse. Right? That as an idea, to the extent that it moves people, not just persons, not just individuals, but it moves people, that it creates neo-Nazism, that it creates the Ku Klux Klan. These are forces that are larger and more powerful than the individual scale. So if you have a belief that is how you see the world, then to the extent that is true, if that is at all connected to a larger egregore, which usually it is, this means that you're effectively a puppet. Your free will is not participating in the creation of a beautiful world in the form that you actually want. You are instead lending your power to the egregore. Just fact. It's an inconvenient fact. It can be very uncomfortable, and for lots of people, this can create a sense of defensiveness. Well, are you saying that we shouldn't fight racism, for instance? If you listen back to what I just said, the answer will obviously be, no, that's not what I'm saying. But you have to slow down enough to notice, well, why would you come to that kind of conclusion? Because of a memetic immune system. So there's this, if you actually see how memes work, the more you see how memes work, the more obvious it is that the problems that we're running into today, the kinds of crazy challenges that we're facing as a species, because these giant gods that are acting through us are guiding people on power scales that individuals have no idea how to orient to and often don't even notice. So a lot of what I want to encourage and invite through this series I'll be offering is an awareness of memetic flow. just planting these seeds, just noticing, oh, this is how it works. It sort of transforms the sense of self. It brings this sense of, oh, right. Oh, who is anti-racist? Oh, so if I am an anti-racist, well, who is anti-racist? There's a different place to land, a very solid place, a place that I postulate that as you cultivate it, you can eventually come to recognize it as the philosopher's stone. A hat tip to alchemy. So there's a place to land that is incredibly stable. It is the most stable place in existence. That place is the truth. Truth isn't memetic. At least not the way that I'm using it here. Truth is vastly deeper than memes. Now, in a way, part of what I'm saying is something like, if reality didn't exist, then neither would memes. It's like, of course. But most people have no idea how deep in the matrix they are. No idea. Even bringing in this idea of the matrix and being caught in the matrix, a lot of people will notice the places where they are free, where they've seen through things that other people haven't seen through, and go, yeah, I see through this part, and those people don't, so I'm free of the matrix. But if you weren't, it would feel the same way. Okay, so the place from which you can know that you are free cannot come from comparison. It cannot come from identity. It cannot come from a belief system. Where's the foundation? Okay. So I'm going to keep pointing us back there. That's a lot of the vision here. But I think this is something that can be fun and understandable to minds, which is why I'm doing this in public. I have a program where I basically hold a container where people train in building this foundation and cleaning up their lives to get memetic clarity all the way down to the foundation. And so I have a container for that, and it takes time and it takes kind of attention to really engage consciousness with this transformational process. And that needs its own container. But I can offer some things in public that I think are digestible without having to be fully immersed in this kind of transformative process. So I am your professor of magical history. A lot of this is going to go through noticing these arcs of history, but this is just one lens. There's a couple of threads to notice. So earlier I'd thought of a few main themes that I'm going to be talking about. So one is noticing these arcs of history. Given a bunch of examples in this discussion here, there's a lot more to talk about where Isaac Newton's inspirations came from to create the foundation of physics as it's now considered today. And why we call it physics. Did you know that physics is the Greek word for nature? Right? And there's a reason for this. There's a reason for all of it. So when you follow these flows, it makes sense. You can actually see it. So these arcs of history as they manifest in the modern body, why they provide the context they do, not as dry facts. Dry facts are so alienating. I mean something much deeper. You're feeling the way in which history lives in you right now, guides your vision. So this is one major thread that I'm going to be talking about. Egregores. To a large extent, the history of the world that we seem to care about is the history of egregores and the creation of egregores. These sort of living entities, that they actually follow the biological laws of evolution. It's just that their infrastructure, their basis, rather than being molecules and DNA, is human behavior. They use our bodies to change the physical world. They use our minds to think. Now, that doesn't mean that they're parasites, although a lot of them are. Everybody's favorite parasitic meme to hate is Nazism, for example. But there are other memes that are much less vicious, right? Like the Christian golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not really a parasite exactly. It's more like a symbiotic relationship where the egregore, that in this case is a very small one, it's like this sort of intuited classification of like small memes, like jokes are memes that live through people, that pass between individuals. So these smaller memes like the golden rule, and then you have these large ones, right, like communism. So noticing that all of them actually follow the same kinds of laws of evolution. They compete with each other, they fight, and basically everything relevant about what's going on with humanity is about these encounters with egregores with each other, and the way that they fight for resources, and the different species of egregore. No belief needed here. That would be useless, right? Right? We can use a little bit of belief or a little bit of framework in order to see and touch these things. Some touching on elements of identity, of the nature. I'll be light on this one because going on this in public can be a little too philosophical. But there's stuff about who is it that is being possessed? Where is your free will? Where is your choice? Does free will exist? Well, we don't have to talk about that abstract philosophy too much because it doesn't matter. In an important way, it doesn't matter. But there's something about, if you pay attention, you can learn to feel the way that you are lending your energy to these egregoric structures and what it would be like to do something else. This whole thing, like this provides, I guess there's a fourth thing which sort of follows through from the egregore stuff, but maybe some modern commentary too. Like why, like there's a reason why we moved so quickly from pandemic to war in Ukraine. It became a big focus, but somehow the war in Ukraine is still going, and yet we don't pay attention anymore. Some people are saying it, but it's not interesting. Why is it not interesting? Oh, well, first there was the Will Smith slaps Chris Rock thing that shook people for like a week. And then we forgot. We didn't finish talking about it. We just moved on. And then, Roe versus Wade might get overturned. Right? And you notice how that's dying out too. When you start to notice these flows, you notice the way that attention moves. And you start to notice these rhythms. You can actually read when things are going to accelerate. So I bet, I'm bad at getting time estimates exactly, but I bet soon, it'd be pretty surprising if this didn't happen in the next month, but I bet soon there'll be a new crisis. Maybe it will be one of the old crises that spikes up, like, I don't know, Putin nukes some city or something. But there has to be something that catches everybody's attention. It's got to be, because the way that the current dominant species of meme works is by grabbing your attention, primarily with fear and alarm and outrage. So learning to notice this and feel it, you can start to feel these pulses, and you can start to notice in yourself how much of your fear and pain and outrage is actually what it feels like to be serving one of these parasitic egregores. This doesn't mean, I don't mean at all to dismiss the topics, the immense pain of what's going on in the Ukraine, or the deaths that happened from COVID. I don't mean to dismiss any of that. I'm talking about something larger that lets us honor the pain and preciousness that is in fact there, and is keeping us from collectively pausing and going, wait, we are in pain. We are in pain. How do we address that pain? Where this eventually goes, I think I see roughly 2 arcs for humanity's future here. These are like the standard 2 arcs. This is becoming a meme, and I'm a little bit hesitant to even name it because it's like, this is the fact that, like, I saw this in a comic book a couple of days ago. When I start seeing them in comic books in Barnes and Noble, like, okay, at some point, this is ossified and it started to drift away from truth. But I'll go ahead and say it anyway. Just notice if your body gets alarmed. If you start to, oh, this is meaningful. Because I'm offering this in part because there's a way for you to participate in history, in future history. But it's not by holding a sign and yelling some slogan. I mean, that might play a role, but it's not the main role. The humanity's approximate 2 futures. I mean, there's 3, I guess. But the two end games. One is that the current surge of parasitic egregores becomes so potent that it locks down our capacity for creativity and flourishing, which causes us to drift away from truth. Over time, this will rot the foundation, and we will go through a global decay of civilization that, I mean, we're already seeing a lot of the effects of this, but it will continue to accelerate. We'll find more and more infrastructures collapsing. We'll find that our grandchildren do not have as beautiful standard of living as we're able to create today, at least in the first world. Okay. So this is one kind of future that we're looking at. That will eventually collapse. We'll lose a lot of our civilizational knowledge, the same way that the Middle Ages lost a lot of the knowledge of the Romans. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll go through another Renaissance, in which case we restart the same cycle. Same cycle. And hopefully we'll be a little wiser, maybe. Maybe. So that's one possibility. Maybe we just stay on Groundhog's Day, only as Groundhog's Millennium. The other possibility is that humanity becomes memetically literate. The future I'm talking about requires memetic literacy the same way that the Industrial Revolution required normal word literacy, linguistic literacy, like the ability to read and write. We had to have that in order to allow the Industrial Revolution to happen the way it did. And that's part of why literacy increased as the Industrial Revolution took off. Same thing here. We're talking about a type of revolution in the structure of the sort of egregoric ecosystem. It sounds all kinds of fancy, but what I mean is the things that possess people can become pro-human. They can become kind and wise. But what that looks like is not just you're sitting outside looking at Earth and this happens. It feels like something on the inside to witness this. On the inside, what it feels like is you are aware of what is happening. You see the memes that go through the world and that go through you. And that when you talk with others, there's a mutual recognition. This is not the whole thing of what global awakening means, but it's a big part. This is like talking about humanity's mind, viewing humanity as a single entity. What is the structure of its mind? Is it psychotic? Right now, it's very psychotic. it's immensely psychotic. And I mean this in like a fairly technical way. Psychosis is when you are living in a different reality than your body is in. We're creating these bizarre fictions because it serves the egregores currently in the way that they are going through their global battle. It's serving that. But sometimes what is effective in those battles is not effective for attuning to truth. And to the extent that there's a difference, the parasitic egregores will become more effective at battle, which is why we keep getting more and more splitting more and more of this, like left versus right, and anti-racism versus the radical right, and blah blah blah. Like the alt-right, I guess is the term. It's just it keeps getting crazier because of this division, because of the difference between what is effective in egregoric battle versus what is true. So as this kind of literacy starts to spread throughout humanity more, this means that we as individuals become vessels that offer a sort of evolutionary bias towards kind and wise means. It's not something you can force with will. It's not something you impose as an idea. It's something that becomes true in how you embody your existence on this earth. By having that kind of clarity, you become a neuron in the brain of humanity. Humanity becomes a single entity that learns how to think for itself and how to be kind and attentive. That, I think, is a prerequisite for dealing with things like global warming. You can't solve global warming by doubling down on which parasitic egregore you're backing. I mean, you can, but it won't work. In this direction, I think, creates a kind of paradise. We have to be careful, because there's something about people's memetic inheritance of what paradise is extremely biased, and actually is part of the egregoric war, part of the great global memetic war. But there is a kind of paradise that I think could emerge in that direction, and it could unfold fairly quickly if we embody this well. And Marcel is asking, and what's the third direction? The third direction is this kind of churn, okay, where things just keep limping along. They always seem to be accelerating, a little bit like the, what's it called, the shepherd tone. If you look up shepherd tone and you listen to it, there's this trick the shepherd tone does in terms of your perception of hearing. It gives you the impression that the tone is always increasing without end. And you can listen to it as long as you like, and your brain will keep insisting that it is still increasing in pitch. So there's something like that going on here, where a lot of our perceptions are getting warped and shifted so that we are getting more and more and more and more sort of hijacked. Now, I think in practice, this direction, like it can't continue the way that it has been, where it feels like everything is getting faster and faster and more extreme, and then this perception just keeps going on forever, because there's a practical limitation in terms of how much stress a human body can feel. So my guess is that eventually that collapses to the first option I mentioned. My guess is. I guess for the sake of completion, because my audience includes a lot of people from my past in the rationality community, I should quickly mention there's a fourth option, which is humanity does something that makes us extinct, like creates an AI that kills us all, or releases a nanotech cloud that combines all of our carbon into some giant diamond or something. And I guess in theory that could happen. I am unconcerned about that, because that's downstream of other forces. Yes, Marcel, X risk, yes. The term X risk is short for existential risk. Although the technical term of that happening is not existential risk, it's existential catastrophe. And what we're looking at is the potential for it to happen, which is an existential risk. But X risks are another type of memetic structure. And if you don't recognize what kind of role they play in your being and your thinking, then they can also warp your thinking, just like the apocalyptic thinking, apocalypse cults have the same problem. There's an issue of how do you relate to the belief of the end of the world, and why is the belief in the end of the world appealing? It will often seem like it's because it's true, or because it might be true. Where's your truth sense? Where's the ground? Okay. So I think that is plenty to say about this. Pragmatically, my plan right now is I'm going to pick a topic. This session, I originally imagined I was just going to announce, I'm going to do this thing, but I can't seem to talk less than an hour. So this is just how I am. So I'm going to pick some topic, like for this coming Tuesday. I'm thinking of either going into the history of science, and because there's a very particular sort of gaslighting move that's happened that I've actually written about. I have an article I've written about called The Great Gaslighting. It's on the Medium. But that seems like a worthwhile thing to talk about, to give some context, because our understanding of what science even is has been significantly warped for the sake of this kind of effective at possessing people, and as a kind of defensive mechanism that is 300 years out of date. But it's resulted in a kind of split in people's awareness and their understanding of what spirituality is. So spirituality ends up being really flaky and stupid a lot of the time, but science ends up being very disembodied and denies obvious truths because it doesn't fit in a particular paradigm which it believes in, because that's the paradigm it's chosen, which means it's correct. Right? It's very loopy. So understanding that can be very helpful for getting some orientation to what even would a sane spirituality be? What would it mean to fuse mysticism and science back together? I do mean back together. Like they're two sides of something. That something is basically alignment with truth. Right? But how do you do that fusion that isn't just, hey, quantum physics says that our consciousness creates reality? It's just Jesus. It's just insane. Marcel posted the link to the article. But there's a way to knit this stuff together that isn't just using scientifically flavored things to back mystical ideas, or using mysticism to interpret things that are going on with physics, but is instead noticing there is a deep wisdom in scientific tradition, and obviously it has power. How do we relate that to the knowing that is deep in our, for lack of a better term, soul? How do we orient to some of these transcendental experiences from a scientific point of view without squeezing the life out of it or presuming things that we don't in fact know? So there's a way to orient to this, and part of it has to do with looking at why we got here. So I may talk about that. I may actually talk about the history of mathematics, and what happened to why it is that math is such a horrendously taught subject, and why it feels so dead, and why so many people hate math. There's a reason for that too. So those are two example topics. I'm sure I will give presentations on these at some point. But these are the kinds of things that I'm planning on zooming in on. Things about what the role of alchemy has been in the shaping of our collective Western consciousness. What sort of double deal was that the West made. A lot of the history of modern magic, the last 100 years of magical and new age ideas, actually has a particular history that, once you have the context, it makes sense of a lot of why certain ideas keep resurrecting. Like, why did the law of attraction come about? Why did people start buying into it? Why is it that why is it that people buy into the law of attraction, even though it doesn't seem to have power comparable to something like, I don't know, having a good financial strategy, right? Becoming an investment banker, right? These are places where you can have a lot of power, but can mean something funny. So so I'll grab one of these kinds of topics and I'll go into it. And I invite people to engage. Like, I have a lot to, I certainly have a lot to say, but I also am happy to pivot exactly what I'm talking about based on engagement. So those will be happening. Current plan is on Tuesday mornings, Pacific time, 8 a.m. And I'll announce if the time gets shifted. And I'll plan on posting the recordings of these on YouTube as well. So yeah, if you don't want to navigate Facebook, you just want to watch the replays, you can look on YouTube as well. The link for my YouTube channel is in my Facebook profile. That's youtube.com/Morphenius. So that's what I have for today. It's very different, a much longer arc than I was planning when I sat down this morning. I may have to make a point of making notes ahead of time. So I go, okay, this is the thread that I want to at least try to follow. So I want to give you a chance to see, for those who are still hanging around, do you have any, as an old colleague of me would sometimes say, any questions, comments, snide remarks? Anything you want to share or express at this moment? Give it another few seconds. I notice Facebook changed some of its interface so that I can't actually see how many people are watching anymore. Okay, well, I will assume that either no one's watching or no one has, at this point, or no one has anything that they want to share. So I'll close this here. Thanks for visiting.